Some nights you arrive somewhere you've never been before, and somehow it feels familiar. Welcome back, FA here. If you're new tonight, settle in. If you've been here before, you already know the way. I played this game a while ago, back when it was still in early access. Some of you might remember. There was a long, no commentary video, hours of it. Hotel Architect just hit its full release this week, so we're coming back. But this time we're doing it differently. There's a story now. A man, his first evening in his own hotel. An old name on the sign, kept on purpose. And a long night ahead of us. If this is your kind of night, hit subscribe and the like button. It helps more than you think. This is a small place, and if you're reading this, you already know how growing happens here. Slowly. And if you want to say something before the story begins, leave a comment. What brought you here tonight? Alright. Tonight you are Tom, a man who has worked in other people's hotels for 20 years. Tonight you spend your first evening in your own. The third step on the staircase still creaks. You've known about it for almost 20 years. And you've never asked anyone to fix it. Maybe you're afraid of what the staircase would sound like without it. Maybe it would sound like a different building. You're coming down from the small apartment above the lobby, the one where you've slept for almost 2 decades. Tonight is the first night you don't wake up to anyone else's footsteps in the building. No one above you, no one below. Just a building and you, and the slow, careful way the light catches the wood as you reach the bottom. The lobby is the first thing you taught yourself to love about this place. It isn't large, it isn't grand. The ceiling is higher than it has any right to be in a building this size. That's the only thing that makes it feel bigger than it is. The walls are pale, somewhere between cream and the colour of old paper. They hold the light gently. You always thought they were forgiving walls. You turn on the lamps one at a time. Not the overheads, never the overheads, not in the evening. The lamps are amber, 3 of them, and each one takes a second to warm up. You can hear it almost, the slow rise of the filament. The first lamp is on the front desk. You move toward it without thinking. Your hand finds the brass switch the way it always does. Second knuckle of your index finger. Slight downward press. 20 years ago, you used to fumble for it. Now your hand knows. The light comes up. The desk is the heart of the room. Old maple, darker on top from years of use, and lighter underneath where the legs meet the floor. The right corner. The corner closest to the door has a small worn patch where the wood almost glows. It isn't damage exactly. It's just where elbows have rested for so many decades that the grain has been polished from the inside. You've watched yourself rest your own elbow there hundreds of times. Sometimes you wonder how much of that patch is you. The logbook is open on the desk, the way it always is. The pages aren't yours yet. They still belong to the man who taught you how to keep them. You haven't started writing in it since since. You felt like he should get a little more time on those pages. Maybe you'll start tomorrow. Maybe not. You move to the second lamp. It sits on the small side table next to the armchair. The chair that nobody ever bought. The chair that came with the building when its previous owner moved in 50 years ago. You've never sat in it. You don't know why. It feels like sitting in it would be presumptuous somehow, as if the chair is still waiting for someone. The chair leans slightly to the right. The cushion is sunken on that side. Whoever sat in it the same way for a very long time. You light the lamp. The light catches in the chair's wooden arms, old, dark, smoothed by the same hands that broke the cushioning. The whole chair seems to breathe a little easier under the light. Across the room, on the wall above the small reading table, hangs a clock. It is 14 minutes slow. You've known about the clock for as long as you've known about the staircase. The second hand stutters every 10 seconds. A tiny mechanical hiccup, like the clock is catching its breath. The man who owned this place before you never had it fixed. He used to say, the sound of the old is a sound too. You didn't understand what he meant for years. You think you understand now. The third lamp is on the small table by the front window. You walk toward it slowly. Outside, the town is quiet. It's that kind of quiet that only happens after 11 at night, when even the cars have gone home and the street light at the corner is the only thing awake. You light the lamp. The window glass catches the warmth, throws a small reflection back at you. You can see yourself faintly in it. You don't look at yourself for long. The room is yours now, fully lit. 3 pools of amber, 3 small islands of warmth. Outside dark, inside your hotel. Your hotel. The words still don't fit in your mouth right. You walk a slow circle around the lobby, not because you have to, but because tonight you want to. The wood floor is older than you are. It runs in long planks from the front door to the back, and the boards by the desk have darkened from 100 years of feet, stopping at the same spot. You know which boards squeak. You know which ones don't. In another life, you used to step on the silent ones on purpose, when you didn't want a guest to hear you coming. Tonight you don't bother. The reading table by the window holds 3 books. None of them are yours. They came with the room. One of them is a paperback that's been left here so many times by so many different guests that the spine has cracked and re-cracked. You like that book. You've never read it. You just like the shape of it on the table. There's a small standing brass ashtray near the armchair. Empty, polished. No one has used it for years. The man who owned this place before you never let anyone smoke in the lobby. He didn't mind smoking. You minded the smell sticking to the wood. You used to say the building had to breathe. You think he was right about that too. You passed behind the desk into the small back office. The office is the size of a closet, just barely big enough for a chair and a narrow table, and a single drawer cabinet against the wall. The light in here is older, warmer, more yellow than the lamps in the lobby. It comes from a small green shaded banker's lamp that you don't remember anyone ever turning off. The drawer cabinet has 4 drawers, and each of them has a small brass label in a brass frame. Reservations, invoices, correspondence, personal. You've opened the first 3 many times over the years. You've only opened the 4th one once, and that was last winter, after. You don't open it tonight. You step back into the lobby. There's a small kitchenette behind a curtain to the left of the desk. Really just a counter, a hot plate, a kettle, 2 shelves of mugs, and a tin of tea that's been there for as long as you can remember. The tin used to be full when you started working here, and it was half full. Then it was almost empty. Somewhere in the last few years, you started refilling it without ever mentioning that you were refilling it. You turn the kettle on. The kettle is old enough that it whistles, but it's a soft whistle, more of a hiss with a little bit of song at the end. You like the way it builds. While you wait, you look at the front door. The door is heavy oak, painted dark green on the outside, dark wood on the inside. There's a brass handle, and just above the handle there's a small brass plate set into the wood that reads, "The Hollis House." The plate is old. The plate is older than you. You could have changed the name on the building. The lawyer asked you twice if you wanted to, but you said no both times. You said it without thinking the first time. The second time you said it on purpose. You said it's still his house. You weren't sure that was the right answer until you said it out loud. The kettle starts to sing. You take a mug from the second shelf, the one with the small chip near the rim. Your mug, the same one for 19 years, and you fill it. The steam rises. The tea is dark. You don't add anything. You haven't added anything since you stopped trying to like it the way other people liked it. You carry the mug back to the desk, set it down on the right side, near the worn corner. You stand for a moment with both hands flat on the maple, just feeling it. Then you turn, not facing the door anymore, but facing toward me, toward the small space at the edge of the room, where you can almost imagine someone is sitting, listening.
Looks like you're starting to run low on cash. No worries. You can always use your cash credit or grab a loan from the bank. As long as your assets are greater than your debt, you won't get into trouble.
If the lamps are warm enough for you, if Tom's lobby is starting to feel like somewhere you could stay, I want you to know that the simple act of being here, with me, with him, helps this little place grow. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button, tap the like. They cost you nothing, and they tell the algorithm that this kind of story is worth showing to someone else who can't sleep tonight. Someone like you, someone who needs a long, quiet hour somewhere else. And while you're settling in, wherever you are tonight, whatever time it is where you are, leave a small note in the comments. Where are you listening from? What's the hour? I read them. I always do. The next morning with coffee. It's one of the small good things. All right. You stand at the desk with both hands wrapped around the mug. And for a long time, you don't think about anything at all. That's a kind of luxury you've earned tonight. The hotel is closed for renovations until tomorrow morning. Your first guest, a single booking, arrives at noon. The phone won't ring. No one is going to knock on the door. You don't have to be sharp. You don't have to be ready. You can just stand here and let the tea steam fade. Standing this way, doing nothing, your mind goes where it goes when you give it permission. It goes back. It goes to the first hotel you ever worked at. You were 19. You were a bellboy at a big, ugly seaside place, 3 towns up the coast. A hotel that had been built in a hurry in the 60s and looked like it. 240 rooms, pink stucco on the outside, polyester carpets in the corridors. Awful, really. But the bay was beautiful, and the bay was the only thing the hotel actually had to do. So it didn't matter that the building was ugly. People didn't come for the building, they came for the water. You worked there for 3 summers and 1 full winter. In the off-season, the hotel was a different place. The big restaurant closed, the pool was drained, most of the rooms went empty. And the few guests who came in winter were the kind of guests you remember, because there were so few of them, and because they came back. Miriam came every October. Her name was Miriam. You don't say it often, even in your own head, even now, but you know it. She was a small woman, maybe 70 when you first met her, with very straight white hair cut to her chin and a way of standing that made her look taller than she was. She always wore the same dark green wool coat, always the same suitcase, soft brown leather, a single brass clasp, always alone. She always asked for room 212. 212 was on the 2nd floor, end of the corridor facing the bay. It wasn't anything special. It was the same as every other room on that floor. But she asked for it every year. And the desk clerk before you, a tired older woman named Joan, who smoked in the back office and called everyone honey. Joan always made sure 212 was hers. The first time you carried Miriam's bag up to her room, she didn't speak. You unlocked the door. You set the bag down by the closet. You asked if there was anything else she needed. She smiled, a small, polite, faraway smile, and shook her head. You took the elevator back down. The second year you remembered her. You said, "Welcome back, ma'am." She looked at you for a long second, like she was deciding something. And then she said, "Thank you." She didn't say it warmly. She didn't say it coldly. She just said it. She stayed 3 nights every year. She ate in the restaurant once, lunch, by herself. The rest of the time she walked along the bay. Long walks. Coat buttoned all the way up, even when the wind was soft. You worked at that hotel for 3 Octobers. You carried her bag up 3 times. You carried her bag back down 3 times. She never had more than the 1 suitcase. She never had anyone with her. Joan was the one who told you, the 3rd year, why she came. Apparently, and Joan whispered this, standing in the back office with a cigarette half burned in her hand. Miriam had spent her honeymoon at the hotel 40-something years before. The first week of October, room 212. Her husband had been a soldier, and he had died 3 years into their marriage. Drowned, Joan said. Some kind of accident on a fishing boat, off a coast that wasn't this one. Miriam came back every October because that was the only week of her life she had ever spent next to him, in a room with a view of the water. You didn't know what to do with that information when Joan told you. You were 19. You hadn't loved anyone like that yet. You weren't sure anyone really did. The next October you stood at the front desk and watched her sign the registration card. And your throat did something strange. You wanted to say something. You didn't know what. You ended up just handing her the key. She smiled, that same small smile, and said thank you. You walked her to the elevator, like always. You left that hotel the following spring. You moved up the coast. You worked at 3 more places before you found this one. You never saw Miriam again. You wondered for a few years whether she kept going to the seaside hotel. Then you wondered whether the hotel was still there. Then you stopped wondering. Sometimes, even now, when the light hits a certain way in October, when the leaves go that particular orange, you think about a small woman in a dark green coat, walking along a bay, looking at water that didn't take her husband, looking at water that just happened to be water. You think about how some people make a kind of cathedral out of 3 nights every year for 40 years. You think about how you can love someone for a whole life out of 1 week of memory, if you have to. You blink, your tea is barely warm. You take a slow sip. The mug is too cool now to really taste, but you drink anyway. Some memories arrive in pairs. After the seaside hotel, you went to work at a small inn. 12 rooms, an old colonial building, in a town with a single traffic light. The kind of town where the postmaster knew everyone by their middle name. The inn was run by a couple, husband and wife, who had bought it together as a retirement project, and then realized retirement was much more work than they had counted on. You were their only full-time employee. You did breakfast service, plumbing if it was simple, late night phone calls if it wasn't. You stayed there for almost 3 years. You remember 2 of those guests vividly. You probably forget the other several hundred entirely. The first ones were a young couple. They were on their honeymoon. They had driven up from somewhere in the south. 3 days of driving, they said. The kind of drive that was supposed to be romantic and ended up just being long. They arrived in the middle of the afternoon, sunburned, exhausted, laughing at each other, somehow still in love after 72 hours in a small car. You gave them the best room, the one with the wraparound window. They came down for dinner twice and breakfast every morning. They stayed 5 nights. You don't remember their names. You took the registration card, of course. You wrote down their names. But you don't remember them now. Which is fine, because they weren't the kind of guests whose names you needed. What you remember is the way they looked at each other in the lobby on their last morning. He was loading the car. She was standing in the doorway of the inn, drinking coffee from one of the inn's heavy ceramic mugs. He came in to get the last of their bags, and he stopped at the door, and he looked at her, drinking coffee in the doorway. He didn't say anything. He just looked. She looked back at him. It lasted maybe 4 seconds. You were standing behind the desk, pretending to be busy with the logbook. You weren't pretending well. You were watching them. You couldn't help it. It was one of those small, accidental moments that you weren't meant to see. But the doorway pointed at the desk, so you saw it. You thought then, and you thought it many times since, that the things people remember from their lives, the parts they actually hold on to, are almost never the parts they think they will. They didn't go back home and tell anyone about the 4 seconds in the doorway. They probably forgot the 4 seconds in the doorway. They probably told everyone about the wraparound window and the lobster they had on the 3rd night and the cold lake they swam in on the 4th. But you remembered the 4 seconds. You wonder sometimes who else stood somewhere just out of frame and remembered a moment from your own life that you forgot about an hour later. And the other guest you remember from that inn was a man who tried for almost 10 minutes to open the wrong door. He was a businessman. He came in late, around midnight. After a long drive, the inn was off a highway exit, and a lot of late arrivals stopped with us because the next motel was 40 miles further. He was tired in that specific way some men get tired, where the body works but the brain has clocked out for the night. He took his key. He took the directions to his room. He went upstairs. 5 minutes later, you heard the sound of the key turning unsuccessfully in the lock. It went on for a while, a polite, slow scrape of metal, then a pause, then another scrape, then a pause. The man wasn't angry. He wasn't loud. He was just patient. Like maybe if he tried it 40 more times, the door would change its mind. You You went upstairs. He was standing in front of room 7. His key was for room 4. When he saw you coming up the corridor, he looked at the key. He looked at the door. He looked back at the key. And he looked at you and said, very seriously, I think the building's confused tonight. He walked into room 4. He thanked you. He shook your hand. He said, good people, this inn. Then he went into his actual room, and you heard the door click shut, and you heard him laugh, once by himself, a soft, tired laugh, through the wall. You went back downstairs. The inn was quiet again. You still think about that man sometimes, when something in your own life isn't going the way you want it to. The way he kept trying the wrong door for 9.5 minutes, with no anger, no complaint, just patience. You don't know if that's wisdom or denial. You suspect it's both. You suspect a lot of wisdom is denial that's been around long enough to become its own kind of truth. You hope wherever he is now that someone is still pointing him toward the right door. The hotel is very quiet around you. The clock stutters. 10 seconds. The clock stutters again. You set the mug down. You walk back behind the desk into the office, just to fill the smaller room around you. The green shaded lamp is still on. It throws long shadows from the chair onto the wall. You don't sit down. You stand for a moment with your hand on the back of the chair, looking at nothing in particular. All memories. After the small inn, you worked one summer at a third place, a hotel in a riverbank town further inland. 3 floors, brick. A long porch on the front where guests sat in the evening. That summer was a wet one. You remember a lot of rain. You remember a man who came in during the worst storm of August. You arrived just after 10 in the evening. The river was almost up to the road. The wipers on his car couldn't keep up. You could see him pull into the small lot at the side of the hotel. And you could see he was wet through the windshield before he even got out. He came in carrying a single old leather suitcase and wearing a coat that wasn't a real coat. It was a suit jacket, soaked dark, sticking to his shoulders. He was maybe 60. His tie was undone. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He stood in the doorway and said, I don't have a reservation. You said, we have rooms. You gave him room 3 on the first floor. Quietest, closest to the bathroom, easiest for a man who looked the way he looked. You told him about the kettle in the lobby, if he wanted something hot. You told him the dining room was closed, but you could probably find him bread and cheese. He shook his head. He said, just sleep, thank you. He took the key. He went to his room. You expected to never see him again. People who arrived like that, in storms at 10 at night, usually slept 10 hours and were gone by breakfast. But around midnight, you were doing the last walk through the lobby. and he came back down. He was wearing the same clothes, dry now, kind of, dried by the warmth of his body, wrinkled in a way that made you think the suit might never recover. He stood at the bottom of the stairs and said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep. May I sit?" You said, "Of course. The porch is dry now." You went out to the porch. You watched him through the screen door. He sat in one of the wicker chairs. He didn't have a drink. He didn't have a cigarette. He just sat. He looked at the river, what he could see of it in the dark, for almost an hour. You went about your work. Every time you passed the screen door, you were still there. Around 1 a.m, he stood up and came back inside. He stopped at the desk. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you for not asking." You nodded. You went back upstairs. He left in the morning, early, before breakfast. He paid in cash. He didn't ask about a receipt. You never knew who he was. You never knew where he was going. You never knew what had happened to him that day. What had put him in that suit, that storm, that car at 10 at night, with no reservation. You never wanted to know exactly, but sometimes you wondered if he made it, wherever he was trying to make it to. You thought over the years about how many guests you've checked into rooms whose lives were on fire that day. People who looked perfectly normal. People who took their key and said thank you and went up the elevator. You don't know what happens to a person between the front desk and the 3rd floor. You only know what they show you, and most of them don't show you anything at all. That's the small kindness of the work, you think. You give them a room. You give them a door that locks. You give them a place where nobody is asking them anything. You don't have to know. The last memory comes to you slowly. It comes the way memories come when they aren't fully solid, when they've been worn down by being remembered too many times into something almost mythological. At the Riverbank Hotel, in the same summer, a man checked in for one night, left in the morning, and left something on the dresser in his room. It was a small piece of hotel stationery, the kind every hotel keeps in every drawer, with the property name printed at the top in faded blue ink. He had written on it. The note had 3 sentences. The note wasn't addressed to anyone. It said, "I'm sorry I never wrote to you. I tried tonight. I couldn't." That was it. No name, no envelope, no instructions. He had left it on the dresser, weighed down by the small glass ashtray, where the next person to enter the room would absolutely find it. You were the next person who entered the room. You stood in the doorway of room 12 for a long time, looking at it. You didn't pick it up right away. You weren't sure if it was meant to be found, or just meant to be left. You weren't sure what the difference was. You finally took it down to the desk and put it in the lost and found drawer. in case he came back. He never did. The next time you checked the drawer, months later, the note was still there. You took it home. You didn't know why. You still have it somewhere, in a box upstairs. You don't look at it, but you know it's there. You think now that he left it on purpose. He couldn't write the letter he was trying to write. So he wrote 3 sentences and left them in a room he was about to leave, in a town he wasn't from, where a stranger would find them and not know who they were for. He let the note exist in the world without ever knowing if it reached anyone. You think maybe that's enough for some things. Maybe sometimes you write a sentence and put it down, and the world holds it, even if nobody it was meant for ever reads it. You're standing in the office with your hands still on the back of the chair. The lamp is still on. Outside, the town is still asleep. You walk back into the lobby. The mug on the desk has gone cold. You pick it up. You carry it back to the kitchenette. You don't pour it out. You just set it next to the kettle, with the tea bag still in it. The way some people do when they're not done with the cup, that they aren't quite drinking it anymore either. You refill the kettle. You don't turn it on yet. You walk back into the lobby and stand in the middle of it. The lamps are still warm. The clock stutters. The chair leans to the right. You came to this hotel when you were 26. You had been working in the business for 7 years by then. You'd gotten tired of the big places. You'd gotten tired of the small places too. You'd started to feel that the work was the same everywhere. You carried bags, you turned keys, you smiled at people, you fixed things. And the only thing that ever changed really was the building. You had started thinking about leaving the business entirely. You were considering trade school. You were considering driving a truck. You weren't going to drive a truck. You knew you weren't going to drive a truck. But it was a kind of fantasy you kept around because it gave you somewhere else to look. You answered a small ad. The ad was 3 lines long. It said, front desk and general work, small hotel, live-in apartment included, quiet town, honest hours. You drove out to see the place on a Saturday morning. It was late spring. The road in from the highway was longer than you expected. You missed the turn twice. When you finally found the building, you sat in the car for a few minutes, just looking at it. It was smaller than every other hotel you'd ever worked at. It had 10 rooms. The brass plate on the door read, the Hollis House. The paint on the door was dark green, a different green than the green on the door of the Riverbank Hotel, but green enough that you noticed. The front steps were a little crooked. There was a planter on the porch with something dead in it. You went inside. The lobby was lit by lamps, not overhead lights, lamps. You remember that very clearly, even though it was nothing unusual. You remember it because lamps in the daytime felt like a decision. Most hotels lit their lobbies with whatever was cheapest. Whoever lit this lobby had thought about it. There was a man behind the desk. He was maybe 65 then. He had white hair that was thinning at the top, and the kind of face that had clearly been working faces for a long time. He didn't look up immediately when you came in. He finished writing something in the logbook, slowly, carefully, and then he set down his pen and looked at you. He said, "Tom?" That was the first time anyone in this building ever said your name. You said yes. You sat down. He didn't shake your hand. He didn't get up. He didn't offer you coffee. He just sat behind the desk with his hands folded and asked you very simple questions in a very quiet voice for almost an hour. He asked, "What hours can you work?" He asked, "What do you do when you can't fix something?" He asked, "What kind of guest do you like the most?" He asked, "What kind of guest do you like the least?" He asked, "What would make you leave?" You answered all of them honestly. You didn't try to impress him. Something about it made you feel like trying to impress him was the same as failing the interview. He nodded at every answer. He didn't write anything down. At the end, he said, "I'd like you to start on Monday." You said, "Okay." He said, "The apartment is upstairs. It's small. The plumbing is loud. You'll get used to it." You did. You did get used to it. You drove home that afternoon. You packed a bag. You drove back on Sunday with everything you owned in the trunk of your car. It fit. It all fit easily. You weren't carrying much at 26. You climbed the stairs to the apartment for the first time. The third step creaked. You stopped on it. You went back down to the second step. You stepped up onto the third step again. It creaked again. You smiled just a little. You weren't sure why. The apartment was, as he'd said, small. 2 rooms and a bathroom. A window facing the back garden. The small, overgrown rectangle behind the building that was mostly weeds, and one stubborn rosebush that someone had planted decades ago and that refused to give up. You put your clothes in the closet. You put your books on the windowsill. You sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the building. You'd worked at 5 hotels by then. You'd never sat on the edge of a bed in one of them and just listened. The building made small sounds. The radiator hissed once and went quiet. A pipe in the wall ticked, paused, ticked again. Outside, a car drove past, slowly, the way cars drove in towns like this one, where there was nowhere to be in a hurry. You thought, I could do this for a while. You didn't know it yet, but you'd just decided to do it for almost 20 years. Your first weeks at the Hollis House were quiet. The man behind the desk, the man who had hired you, the man who lived in the larger apartment on the 3rd floor, were at the morning and afternoon shifts. You were at the evenings and nights. He came down at at 6 in the morning. You went up at 11 at night. You overlapped for about an hour every day in the late afternoon. That was when you learned the building. He taught you the way some people teach things, by doing them in front of you, slowly, and waiting for you to ask questions. He showed you the logbook. He showed you which pen he used, a heavy black ballpoint kept in the desk drawer, never anywhere else. He showed you the way he wrote dates, small in the upper right corner of each page, even though there were already printed dates at the top. He said the printed dates were for the company that made the logbook. The handwritten dates were for him. You didn't understand the difference until much later. You learned that some men keep a record of their lives the way other men keep a journal. The book is the same. The intention is different. He showed you the kettle. He showed you which mug was his. He didn't tell you which mug would become yours. He let you find that on your own. You picked the one with the small chip near the rim because it looked like nobody else wanted it, and because the chip didn't bother you, and because the handle felt right. The first time he saw you drinking from it, he nodded once, very slightly, and went back to writing in the logbook. He showed you the chair in the lobby. He didn't say, "This is my chair." He didn't need to. The cushion was already broken in the way that only one person, sitting in one specific way, can break a cushion in. You understood without him saying it. You never sat in it. Not in 20 years. In those early months, the hotel had a slow, steady rhythm. 2 or 3 rooms occupied most weeks. A few regulars, traveling salesmen who came through twice a year, retirees who liked the area and didn't want to drive any further, the occasional couple looking for somewhere quiet, the kind of guests who didn't need anything from you except to be left alone. The phone rang maybe 4 times a day. The front door opened maybe 6. It was in every measurable way the calmest job you had ever had. You weren't sure at first what to do with the calm. You had spent 7 years moving fast. Big hotels were always behind on something. Small inns were always understaffed. You developed the habit of treating every minute like there was something it could be filled with. A guest to greet, a sheet to change, a problem to fix. The Hollis House had problems, but the problems didn't pile up. They came one at a time, and they waited their turn. It took you a year to slow down. He noticed, of course he noticed. He noticed everything. But he didn't say anything about it for almost 12 months. And then, one autumn afternoon, when you were standing behind the desk, doing nothing at all, just looking out the window at the street, he came down for his shift and saw you. And he stopped halfway across the lobby and said, "Took you long enough." That was all. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. In year 2, he started letting you do things he hadn't let you do in year 1. He let you answer the phone on the first ring instead of waiting for him. He let you handle the deposits on Friday afternoons. He let you call the plumber when the kitchen sink in room 6 clogged on a Tuesday and refused to unclog itself for 3 days. These were small things. They didn't feel like promotions. They felt like trust, slowly extended, in the only way he knew how to extend it. He didn't praise you. He never praised you. The closest he ever came was in year 3, when you fixed a stuck window in room 4, without being asked. He saw the window was working when he made his afternoon round, and he came back down to the desk and said, "Good." That was it. Good. You felt it for the whole rest of that day. Sometimes you think people who don't praise you make you stronger than people who do. Sometimes you think it just makes you hungrier. You're not sure which one it was for you. In year 4, he started leaving the hotel for short trips. 2 days, 3 days. He never said where he went. He never told you when he was coming back. Exactly. He just said, Tuesday probably, or Wednesday. You ran the hotel by yourself. You slept in the small apartment. You answered the phone. You greeted the guests. You walked through the empty rooms in the evenings and turned out the lights. When he came back, he never asked you how it had gone. You think he could tell. You think he could always tell. You were happy those first years. Or you don't know if happy is the word. You were settled. You were doing work that felt like work. You were living in a building that didn't expect anything from you, that you couldn't give it. You were learning every day the small particular shape of a place you had not made, but were beginning to fit into. You think, looking back, that fitting into a place is its own kind of love. You don't have to build it. You don't have to choose it. You just keep showing up, and one morning you realize a building has shifted slightly around the shape of you. It's not your hotel yet. It will never be your hotel, but it has started to know your hands. The lobby is still quiet around you tonight. The clock stutters. You and the man you worked for, Mr. Hollis, never became friends in any way you could have described to someone who had not seen the two of you working in this lobby for 15 years. He didn't want a friend. You didn't want one either. But what you became was something else. Something that doesn't have a clean word in the language. You worked the same job in the same room for 20 years. He taught you how he did it. You did it the way he did it for a long time. And then, eventually, you did it your way. And he watched you do it your way. And he didn't say anything, because he didn't have to. He had a wife once. She died before you ever met her. He kept a small photograph of her in the drawer behind the desk. 3rd drawer down on the left, under a folder of old receipts that nobody ever looked at. You saw it by accident in year 3, when you were looking for a missing room key. You closed the drawer. You never mentioned it. He never mentioned that he kept it there. He had 2 children, a son, a daughter. They lived far away. The son in another state, the daughter in another country. They came to visit sometimes. The son came once a year around the holidays. The daughter came less. You don't think they had a falling out. You think their lives had just gone in different directions, the way some lives do. And Mr. Hollis was not the kind of man who tried to pull people back when they had gone. He let them go. He let them write to him. He answered their letters carefully, slowly, with the same black ballpoint pen he used in the logbook. He showed you one of his letters to his son once, not on purpose. You came into the office while he was finishing it, and he was reading it back to himself. And he looked up and saw you, and didn't try to hide it. He just held it out to you and said, "Would you read this? Tell me if it sounds like me." You read it. It sounded like him. You said so. He nodded. He folded the letter. He put it in an envelope. He didn't seal the envelope yet. He never sealed envelopes until they were ready to go to the mailbox. He said, "Thank you, Tom." He didn't say your name often. When he did, it landed. He had habits. He drank tea, never coffee. He read the newspaper every morning at the small reading table by the window, the same table where the 3 guest books still live. He kept his shoes shined. He wore a tie every day, even when no one was coming. He said a tie was for himself, not for guests. He said you should dress for the work you do, not for the people watching you do it. You didn't always wear a tie. He didn't insist. He just wore his. He never raised his voice, not in 20 years. Not at a guest who was difficult. Not at a plumber who didn't show up. Not at a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. He had a way of speaking when something needed to be handled that made the volume of the room around him drop. He turned the volume down on a situation just by being in it. You tried to learn how to do that. You think you have, partly. You're not sure you'll ever do it the way he did. He had a fondness for old objects that had outlived the people who used them. The clock on the wall, of course, but also the ashtray, the chair, the brass plate on the front door, the desk lamp in the back office, the kettle in the kitchenette. He didn't replace things if he didn't have to. He fixed them. And if he couldn't fix them, he learned to live with what they had become. You think, looking back, that this is part of why he hired you. You think he could tell from the way you sat in your interview chair that you were also someone who would rather fix something than replace it. You think he was right about that. There was a moment in year 14 when you almost left. You weren't unhappy. You weren't restless exactly. But you had started to feel, for the first time since you arrived, that you might be too much in one place. You had a friend from your old job at the Riverbank Hotel who had become a manager at a much bigger hotel in a much bigger city, and he wanted you to come work for him. The pay would have been almost double. The job would have been busier. The building would have been newer. It was, by every measurable standard, a better offer. You sat with the offer for 2 weeks. You didn't tell Mr. Hollis. You wanted to make the decision first, by yourself. You decided to go. And then the morning you were going to tell him, you came down the stairs. The third step creaked the way it always did. And you walked into the lobby, and you saw him sitting in his chair, the one that nobody else ever sat in. And he was reading the newspaper, and the light through the window was hitting the back of his head. And he looked old. Not frail, not weak, just old. You hadn't really noticed until that morning that he was old. You didn't tell him. You went into the kitchenette and made tea instead. You drank it standing up. You went and stood behind the desk and pretended to look at the logbook for almost an hour. He didn't look up. He didn't ask why you were quiet. That afternoon, you called your friend at the big hotel and told him you couldn't take the job. He was disappointed, but not surprised. He said, "I figured. I just wanted to ask." You hung up. You went back to work. You don't know if Mr. Hollis ever knew about the offer. You think he might have. There were a few things in the months that followed that he said to you, small things, offhand things, that made you wonder if he had known the whole time and just decided not to say anything. You'll never be sure. He's not here to ask. But you're glad you didn't go. You're glad about a lot of things when you stand in this lobby alone at night. He got sick in year 19. It wasn't sudden. It came on the way these things come on. Quietly. In small signs you only recognize as signs in retrospect. He started taking the afternoon shift later. He started coming down for his shift in slippers instead of shoes. He started leaving the newspaper unfinished on the reading table. He started forgetting once or twice to refill the kettle. The first time he forgot, you didn't say anything. The second time he forgot, you didn't say anything either. By the third time, you started refilling it for him quietly before he came down. He noticed. He always noticed. He didn't thank you. He just looked at the kettle, then at you, then back at the kettle. He didn't say anything. He went and read the newspaper. He told you finally in late autumn. He sat down at the desk where you were doing the books and he said, "I went to the doctor on Tuesday." He didn't look at you. He looked at the corner of the desk, at the worn patch where the elbows go. He said, "They want to do some tests." You said, "Okay." He said, "I'll keep you posted." That was the whole conversation. You worked the rest of the day. He went up to his apartment around 6 in the evening, earlier than usual. You closed the hotel at 11. You stood in the lobby afterward for a long time, looking at his chair. The test took weeks. The results took longer. The treatments took longer than that. He kept working through most of it. Fewer hours, then much fewer hours, then almost none. By the time spring came, he was only coming down for an hour or two in the late morning, just to sit in his chair and watch the lobby be the lobby. He didn't man the desk anymore. He didn't write in the logbook anymore. He just Sometimes he read, sometimes he didn't. You ran the hotel. You ran it the way he had taught you to run it. You answered the phone the way he would have answered the phone. You wrote in the logbook with his black ballpoint pen, even though it was running out of ink, and you should have replaced it a year ago. You greeted the guests. You walked through the empty rooms in the evenings and turned out the lights. You went up to his apartment every evening at 9 and asked if he needed anything. Most evenings he said no. Some evenings he said, "Stay a minute." You stayed many minutes. You stayed a lot of minutes that last year. He didn't talk much in those evenings. He'd ask about the hotel. You'd tell him about it, who had checked in, who had checked out, whether the sink in room 6 was still being difficult. He'd nod. Sometimes he'd say, "You're doing it right." Sometimes he'd just nod. Once, late in the spring, he said, "I'm going to leave you this place. I want you to know that." You said, "You don't have to." He said, "I know I don't have to. I'm telling you because I want you to start thinking about it like it's yours before it actually is." You didn't know what to say to that. You said, "Okay." He said, "Good." He died in midsummer. It was a hot afternoon. You were behind the desk. The phone hadn't rung for hours. You went up to check on him around 3, because it had been almost a day since he'd come down. And you found him in his chair by the window in his apartment, with the newspaper folded on his lap, in a way that suggested he had finished it, and then closed his eyes for a moment. You sat with him for a long time before you called anyone. You don't talk about that afternoon. You don't even talk about it to yourself usually. But it's part of the building now. It's part of what's in this lobby with you tonight. You don't carry it like a weight. You carry it like a slow, warm thing, lit from inside, that doesn't go out. The will was simple. He had told you it would be, and it was. The 2 children got the savings and a few keepsakes. The hotel went to you. There was a small letter in his handwriting, in an envelope with your name on it, attached to the documents. The letter was 3 sentences long. You don't quote it, even to yourself. It's yours. The investors started calling the next week. There were 3 different offers over the course of 2 months. Bigger companies that wanted to buy the building, knock it down, put up something larger. The offers were generous. They were more money than you had ever seen in your life. You said no to all of them. You said no the first time without thinking. You said no the second time on purpose. You said no the third time because by then you had heard yourself say no twice already. And you knew what your own answer was. The lawyer, the one who handled the estate, asked you if you wanted to change the name on the front of the building. He said it would be cheaper to do it now, while other paperwork was being filed, than to do it later. You said no. He asked again. You said no again. He said, "You sure?" You said, "It's still his house." He nodded. He never asked again. The renovations took the rest of the year. You did most of them yourself. You hired a few people for the things you couldn't do. The wiring, the boiler, the new windows in 3 of the upstairs rooms. But the smaller things, the paint in the floors, and the small touches in the lobby, you did yourself. You worked through the autumn. You worked through the winter. You worked into the spring. You learned a lot of things about this building in that year that you hadn't learned in the previous 19. You learned how the walls were built. You learned which floorboards had been replaced and which were original. You learned where the old wiring had been patched and patched again, the way old wiring is. You learned slowly that the building had a kind of life of its own, separate from anybody who had ever owned it. The building had been here before him, and it was here after him, and it would be here probably after you. You think this is the strangest and most comforting thing about owning a building. You're not really the owner. You're just the one who lives here this year. You walk back to the kitchenette. You pour out the cold tea. You make a new cup. This one you don't drink standing up. You carry it carefully across the lobby to the small reading table by the window, and you set it down. You don't sit at the table either. You stand behind it for a moment, looking at the cushion in the chair that leans to the right, the chair you've never sat in. You look at it for a long time, and then very slowly, you sit down. The cushion takes you. It doesn't fit you the way it fits him. You can feel the shape it remembers, and your shape isn't that shape, but it takes you. The wooden arms feel the same as you imagine they would. The angle of the back is gentler than it looks. You weren't expecting it to be this comfortable. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. From this chair, the lobby looks different. The desk looks further away. The clock looks closer. The front door looks like it's at the end of a small private journey. You understand now why he sat here. From this chair, you can see the whole room without being in the middle of it. You're in the room, but you're a little to the side of it. You can keep an eye on everything without anyone keeping an eye on you. You think this is what he wanted after his wife died. To be in the room, to be a little to the side of it. You sit for a long time. Outside, the town is still asleep. The street light at the corner has been the same color for hours. Somewhere far away, a dog barks once, a single soft bark, and then stops. A car passes the end of the street, slow, going home. You hear the engine for almost half a minute after the car is out of sight. The clock stutters. 10 seconds. The clock stutters again. You think about the guest coming tomorrow. A single booking. A man traveling alone. That's all the reservation form said. He's coming from somewhere a few hours away. He's staying 2 nights. You don't know why he's coming or what he's coming for. You don't need to know. You'll give him a room. You'll give him a key. You'll show him to the 2nd floor. You'll tell him about the kettle, in case he wants tea in the morning. And then you'll let him alone. You think that's a good way to start. You think about all the people who will come through this door over the next year, and the year after that, and the year after that. You think about the ones whose names you'll remember. You think about the ones whose names you won't. You think about the ones who will leave something on a dresser, or look at someone they love in the doorway for 4 seconds, or sit on a porch in a wetsuit at 1 in the morning, looking at a river they don't know. You think you'll be here mostly, behind the desk, or in this chair sometimes when the lobby is empty. You think the chair will get a little more broken in. You think the wood at the corner of the desk will get a little more polished. You think the clock will keep stuttering. You think the third step will keep creaking. You think the building will keep being the building. The mug on the reading table is still steaming, gently. You haven't touched it, you let it cool. You're not in a hurry tonight. You're not in a hurry ever again, really. The pace at this place is the pace at this place, and you've stopped fighting it. You've stopped fighting it in a way that feels less like surrender and more like coming home. You let your eyes close just for a moment, not because you're tired, but because you want to fill the lobby with your ears for a little while. The radiator hisses, a pipe in the wall ticks, pauses, ticks again. The clock stutters. Outside, very far away, the dog barks one more time and is quiet. You think, I am the keeper of a small place. You think that's enough. You open your eyes. The lamps are still warm. The room is still amber, still a little to the side of the world. The chair holds you the way it held him. You take the smallest sip of tea. It's still warm. It tastes like the same thing it always has. You think you'll sit here a little while longer. Just a little while longer. And there's Tom, in the chair he never thought he'd sit in the building he never thought would be his. Thank you for staying with us tonight, with me, with him, with the lobby and the clock and the cold tea. I want to sit here a little longer with you before we let the gameplay take over. Not to explain anything, just to sit. You know, when I was writing this one, I kept coming back to the same small thing. It wasn't the loss. It wasn't the inheritance. It wasn't even the loneliness, although those are all in there. It was the chair. There's something quiet about a chair that one person sits in for a very long time. In the same way, the cushion remembers them, the wood remembers them, and the chair, even after they're gone, holds a kind of small, permanent invitation. Not for just anyone, but for the next person who's willing to sit in it the way it asks to be sat in. I think a lot of life is like that, actually. We move into rooms that other people lived in before us. We carry the work that other people started. We learn things from people whose names we'll forget, and from people whose names we'll never know. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, We don't have to build something from nothing. Sometimes we just have to be willing to take the next seat, to let the shape that's already there hold us. I think there's a kind of dignity in that, a small one. Not the dignity of building something, the dignity of continuing something. We don't talk about that one much. The other thing I kept thinking about while I was writing was Tom's 20 years. 20 years working a job that was, by every measurable standard, smaller than what he could have had.
I know.
He almost left in year 14. He could have made more money. He could have managed a bigger building. He could have done all the things people are supposed to do when they're moving up. But he didn't. He stayed. And in staying, he became something other people don't get to become. Not because he was special, but because staying is its own kind of skill. It takes a particular patience. It takes a willingness to be small in a small place. It takes a kind of love for the work itself, separate from any reward the work might give you. I'm not saying that's the right way to live. I don't think there is one. But there are some of us, some of you listening tonight, I imagine, who have stayed somewhere for a long time. A job, a town, a relationship, a version of ourselves. And sometimes the world makes us feel like staying is a failure of imagination. Like we should have wanted more. Like the people who left did the brave thing, and we did the quiet thing. But maybe the quiet thing is also brave. Maybe the quiet thing is the bravest one sometimes. To keep showing up, to keep refilling the kettle, to keep being the person someone in trouble can knock on the door of at 10 at night in a storm. I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud tonight. If this kind of evening is your kind of evening, I'd love it if you stayed with us for the next one. Subscribe if you haven't. Like the video if it gave you something tonight. It's a small thing, but it travels. It tells the algorithm that someone else who can't sleep should be sent here. And in the comments, wherever you are tonight, whatever the hour is where you're listening, leave a small note. What time is it for you? Where are you sitting? I read them in the morning with coffee. It's one of the small good things. The gameplay will keep going for a long while now. The lobby is still warm. The chair is still holding Tom. You can stay as long as you like, or you can let your eyes close, or you can drift, or you can just listen to the building be the building. Sleep well, or rest well, or whatever this hour asks of you. Good night, friend.
Ashumane dupu.
Asabawi.
Hi.
Shibadu. Asabawi.
I know. Coco.
Fuirua?
I know. Ira! Percibi-du-bois. Ashumanadubu.
Bijboo?
Tara ba? Ada? Fueru ba?
Taba.
I know.